basically, if you look at what it takes to get to really the beginning of implementing your strategic plan, we're at the first step. And we say sort of because what we just did is really a mini version, obviously, of what a real opportunity assessment would be, right? A real one would probably take, depending on how big your company is, 1 or 2 months, and we'd really go through each of the functional areas and really look for the business processes, isolate each of the business processes, and look at that more granular level. But that is the first step to doing this. And now we're going to talk about what happens next. Okay? All right. So we're not just having you identify applications throughout your organization just because it's good practice. That's actually the way that you have to get started, because enterprise AI cannot be implemented in a fragmented way for many reasons. The first being that, you need a distributed computing platform and a whole bunch of data co-located. In most cases, you're going to have all of the data in your company co-located and shared on a platform. Also, there's a whole bunch we already talked about the data silo issues. Typically, there are a bunch of cultural and behavioral issues that have to be addressed all company-wide. And then finally, there's all kinds of workforce implications. And it's not just about finding and hiring data scientists. Managers, executives need to understand risk and resources and what kinds of behavioral changes they have to support. Down to middle managers have to be able to, understand bias and make those kinds of serious business decisions and so on. So you really have to address this in a holistic way and have all 4 of these pieces in place. But the first step is to turn the opportunity assessment that you guys just created into a roadmap. And so that is where we're going to go next. And so the question that we just got asked is, what we do once we finish this opportunity assessment is the very first thing you do is determine the potential ROI of each one. I mean, in many cases, and many people suggest that you just pick one, pick an application and go, that anything's better than nothing. And I guess anything probably is better than nothing, but you wouldn't choose to spend your money on, on an application or on a project without evaluating the ROI, and you shouldn't do that here either. And we think from this point forward, all the decisions should be done using an ROI lens. So it's really important to take that first step. Then, the next thing we would do is conduct a feasibility assessment. So the machine learning productivity tools have actually progressed to the point now where it's pretty easy to do a quick and dirty assessment. You can pull together, a chunk of the data that is associated with it and submit it to tools like DataRobot. And what they do is take that data set and they literally run it through like hundreds or all the previous algorithms that have been used in Kaggle competitions. And so you don't get a finished model out of it, but what you do get is a quick and dirty assessment of, is it even close, right? It helps for other things like algorithm assessment too, but it's now feasible that you could take, this whole list and throw them in and see what happens. So now you have the ROI, and you have a feasibility assessment, and then you use that feasibility assessment to estimate the development time. So, depending on how far along the model is. And even more important, in my view, is that it's just as important to identify the projects that are close, the ones that would get you near-term value, as it is to identify the ones that aren't close, especially the ones that aren't close that have big ROI, because it's going to take you time to staff your data science, it's going to take you time to get your program going, and guess what? You can be collecting that missing data in parallel while you're doing the early programs. So then you pull all that stuff together and you create essentially a staged roadmap that is intelligently ordered, primarily by business ROI, but then there's a bunch of other pieces that you have to take into account that we're going to talk about too for the other pieces. So this machine learning roadmap becomes the backbone by which the next 3 supporting plans are based. So the first is that you have to have a distributed data system platform. So there's actually, the good news is that data science is pretty much open source. The technology itself is, the tools themselves are pretty much free. And the cloud platforms are remarkably affordable and robust. So like AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and IBM Cloud. Those are the three big ones. Amazon's like way far out in front, but even Netflix uses AWS for their infrastructure. So this isn't about, developing some big on-premise application. In fact, it's better. They maintain the software. They, do all that heavy lifting stuff for you. Oops. Sorry. So the first thing you do once you have the roadmap is you create an end state architecture that you need when all of them are done, right? Like plan for the future instead of starting and kludging it together and making all those changes. Just get the picture done and then create the implementation plan that is staged along with the project so that you have them, so you always have the data available right as they need them. So the bringing together, as I mentioned, all of the data sources are going to have to be brought together. And there's a bunch of tools for doing that. And there's, from bringing structured data, there's tools for bringing in unstructured data and from social media and stuff. So that can be done. But the hardest part is often what we talked about earlier. It's the data silos. And that's just a piece of the cultural changes that become problems or the behavioral changes. And the first is just that it requires unprecedented levels of teamwork to embrace enterprise AI. And not just, the part that we just talked about was across functional groups, but that goes up and down as well. The healthy data science projects involve everyone from the people that are using it all the way up to and including, the data scientists and the managers. Everybody has a unique perspective and often ideas for either improving the model or developing the model or using the model come from, all over. So you end up having to have really cross-functional groups managing them. The second thing is that successful integration of AI requires that you have a culture of data-driven decision-making. And then finally, because data science is such a creative endeavor, there has to be an environment where there's a culture of experimentation where even failure is recognized as a part of the process, and where the teams are given resources when they need them, even if it seems like it's not obvious why they're asking for the data that they're asking for. There needs to be a culture where that's supported, and all of it really needs to start with the C-suite commitment. There's just no other way around it. Okay, and then finally, there's the workforce. And we talked about this earlier too, that every single person in the company will be affected. It's not just about the teams that, one team at a time. The executives need to understand, managers need to understand, and then all the way down to the individual contributors. And then there will be some displacement as a result of implementation of AI. And once you have the roadmap in place, you can actually forecast. You can tell which positions are going to be displaced, and you can plan for it ahead of time. And you can size what it's really going to look like and create some sort of a redeployment program or reskilling program. And of course, there's a lot of fear around this, and so being as transparent as possible is the goal. And then finally, there is a widespread perception that there is a scarcity of data scientists. And we thought that that was going to be the case as well, and we actually staffed a position for it and have found something different. So now I'm going to introduce our workforce staffing guide. Explain that.
Let's all give a hand for Beth. She's the brainchild of this company. She is clearly the runner-up. So. I'm just going to simply go over how we approach the workforce enablement plan and go into that. Introduce yourself. My name is Nick Paquin. I'm the workforce enablement director for Milk and Honey. What I do is I deal with staffing and recruitment and all the types of parameters that revolve around that. So I want to start out by just mentioning that there is a common belief that there is a scarcity of data science talent, but that's simply not true, and the numbers say otherwise. So yes, okay, it works. So this is a snapshot that we took from LinkedIn last month, and it was on our own search. There were about 19,000 jobs listed opening for data science positions. And at this very same moment, there were 15,000 data scientists actively seeking for a job position. So when you combine this with the results of another survey we took from, spending 2 to 4 hours of every week, each data scientist that's currently employed is actually still currently searching for a job. So we have a combination of 15,000 data scientists that are listed, and then we also have a quietly searching group of 20,000 extra data scientists. So there's a problem going on, and we need to address that. So what's really happening? So right now, companies don't necessarily appreciate that in a business environment, there are really 4 distinct areas of expertise that are needed to develop, execute, and maintain a proficient expertise needed for machine learning development and its continuous integration. So all this expertise isn't simply existing in one person or one engineer or one project. It really spans over a vast array of things. So here are the 4 areas that we've identified. So you'll see here in the green box, we have strategy and process, right? So the first 2, strategy, process, system architecture, and strategy and process. And what we like to delineate these 2 are, as the top box, the strategy and process, really focus on ideation, definition, and the need of experience in business strategy and business processing. And on the lower box, we have system architecture. And these specialists are trained in the systems and requirements necessary to support these learning projects. So it's really the basis for how we're going to spin up these machine learning projects. And on the next one, we have the development section of the machine learning process. I apologize, I need to move my notes. Okay, so machine learning is actually becoming more and more specialized as it goes through the development. So what we've done to bridge the gap between this miscommunication between the business professionals and the data scientists themselves is develop this actual profiling tool. And what this does is it mends a lot of these barriers that are not meeting in the middle. So you'll recognize the development role history from a previous slide in our business objectives through continuous improvement, and in terms of how we structure the stages of ideation through to production. And this is just one example of how we use a candidate profile. The second page, again, I forgot to note, this is all in your candidate, your packet that you have in front of you. So we'll have a candidate profile and a matching tool as well. So this is actually the second page of the actual candidate profile. And what this accounts for is we really like to harp on the importance of where you learned your data science talent. So whether it be from an accredited degree program, whether it be from a boot camp or an online program, we really like to account for the importance or the significance of that particular program at any given time. And it really harps on this idea of continuous integration, continuous learning, which is not shown in the old references of recruiting practices. So that's really one of the fundamental ideas that we like to focus on. So at the very third page, you'll see a complete listing of the projects. And this is everything based on a complete project portfolio, and it lists us and allows us to match candidates to the jobs by machine learning application experience in conjunction with their business domain experience. So we've actually developed a matching tool for the hiring side and on the candidate side. So companies can help to A, identify what they need in their own business processes, and B, what we can do to help them fill that gap with a candidate or multiple candidates. This tool is a really malleable way to look at how we place and look at data science talent. So the basis of this is when we're more clear about what a company actually is looking for, and when we can more successfully match their needs to the most qualified candidates, we can be more successful on both sides in terms of ideation and identification. I would be happy to elaborate on any of these facts or any of these tools in terms of candidates or client side job openings or anything like that after the session, or if you would like to leave a note in one of the buckets that we've left provided, I'd be happy to reach out afterwards as well. But with that, I will hand it back over to Beth, the brainchild of Milk and Honey, to explain the rest.
So I just want to elaborate a little bit that there isn't a scarcity of data scientists. What there is a misunderstanding of the roles of a data scientist. And most of the requisitions that we see, people are looking for a unicorn, is what they refer to, right? Somebody that can do all 4 roles at once. And they just, I mean, you can find people, but they're just really diverse skills and experience, right? The strategist has to be about business process and has, a lot of years of really, the ROI kind of focus, and on the data and platform level, that has to be somebody who has like big, systems architecture experience, and the people that implement those are not the same people who create them. The other thing is that data science is changing so quickly that the education system just isn't keeping up. And I don't know if you guys saw in the news recently that Google and Apple just ditched their requirement for bachelor's degrees because it's just gotten to the point where it just doesn't make sense. And so these boot camps and certification programs are becoming the norm and very accepted. And so that's one of the reasons why we track these as well. Okay. So once you have, yes. Uh-huh.
I wonder if you just could possibly share some good practice or kind of any kind of tools or techniques around assessing the value or assessing the ROI. I think that's something that we've been struggling with and quite a bit, and I'm sure other people are as well.
Yeah, I mean, we try and base it on how the percentage of return that other companies have gotten from implementing those from the similar ones, and just multiply it by whatever the expected reduction in cost or improvement in revenue is. I mean, and it's not going to be the same, right? I mean, it's not always going to be the same. The other thing is that machine learning models take some time to mature, but you don't have to wait until they're 99% to start using them, right? You can integrate them in a staged way where maybe you don't rely on them completely, but as they get more and more mature, you can integrate them and rely on the data that's coming out of them more and more heavily. So it doesn't have to be, an all or nothing step function. It can be, leading up to. So it's kind of a, there's a ramp. Any other questions before we close it out? Okay, so once you've gotten to that point where you have your stage roadmap, and then you have these 4 supporting plans that are all synchronized with it, then the last thing you need to do is find a way to coordinate it all. And this is another thing that's turned out to be a real challenge, because a lot of times when there's a new technology or a new focus, companies will create new groups at first, right, to ramp up the technology and then slowly it usually gets disseminated. Well, you can't do that with data science so well, because data science is so domain dependent that the data science infrastructure itself has to reside in the business domain for it to be successful. And so, but then the flip side of that is that it's really hard to share learnings and get the kind of teamwork that you need in order to get the commitment to be sharing data. And so there really isn't any perfect answer to this. It depends on the way that your company's organized, but somehow you have to find a way to have a loose organization at least that can coordinate the sharing parts and the learnings without having it be centralized in one organization. Unfortunately, it's just not. A lot of places are moving toward really multidisciplinary teams and really, really flat organizations. Yeah, so this is another part of why there's such a big cultural shift that's required. But once you get and figure that out, then it's a matter of pulling together and really go. You start one project at a time. Actually, some of the automation applications don't require all this cultural shift, and they don't require as much data, because the automation applications like vision models and language models, you don't have to develop your own model. There's only one language and there's only one thing, and most of them are available just by API calls. Like all the big cloud vendors, a software engineer with no knowledge whatsoever of data science can send an image up to their engine and say what they want out of it, and it'll send back a list of the objects, or they can send a chunk of code and it'll send back the sentiment or the summary of it. So a lot of those you can be implemented and don't require all of this. It's really the ones that are about decisions and that are the ones that have to have all of this supporting structure along with it. So the roadmap would include starting. You don't even have to wait to implement some of the automation ones. You don't even have to wait till you're done with all this planning. You could, start as soon as they're identified. some of them. Okay? So we just want to close by giving you a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes, and this is from a company called R.R. Donnelley that went through these growing pains like you guys are going through, and had finally got the C-suite around and got everybody to share their data and got everything they needed in place, and they had this amazing win that like paid for itself over like in 1 month or something. But the point I want to make is that there's something contagious about this. I mean, it's a big lift to get everybody rallied around it and to get everybody working towards the same goal, and sometimes even to convince the C-suite to get behind it. But once you do, it's like, it's contagious, it actually ends up, I mean, it's almost like, in some cases, it's almost like having a crystal ball, you give a technician on the line a piece of paper in the morning and say, oh, how many hours until the machines are going to fail or something. It's exciting, and it's fun. And the teamwork aspect can be leveraged in a good way too. I mean, it doesn't have to be some grueling exercise in, change management or even change leadership. You can use it to really invigorate a company. You just have to stay the course through the early grueling part. And that's it. That's all we have.
Except for questions and answers.
Questions and answers, yeah.
So,
just following up on my earlier question, what do you see the role between the IT and the IT department within our organization versus the business? Who takes the lead on implementing something like this in their department?
It's really a joint effort. I mean, there's a component of the platform and data part that really is kind of a more traditional like data engineering part that isn't necessarily married to the machine learning pieces of it. So there's a part of it, right? The platform part in the distributed environment. But the analytics piece of it, the data scientists need to be in the business units. They need to be co-located in the domain. And the more they have domain knowledge themselves, the more effective they can be. Like one of the reasons our tool looks at, when we place candidates, we look at what applications they've done, and we look at what business experience they have, like what actual groups they've worked in, even before they became data scientists, because it matters.
But do you have a framework, as you were talking, I think, in the earlier part of the whole session, is people don't want to share their data, right?
Yes.
Departments don't, but
Right.
But you also mentioned that you need to consolidate the data at one
do.
place,
You do.
and only then it can happen. So is there a framework to bring the stakeholders on the same page? Something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we advocate that you do this holistic vision, right? I mean, if you once you put ROI on this plan and have a roadmap against it, it gives everybody, well, not only everybody can see that eventually they're going to play, but it gives the C-suite a big picture of what the potential really is, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to drive it. And, usually there's some, difficult choices, and, there's some, rumbling at the executive staff level before it shakes out. But I'll tell you honestly, one of our rules for ourselves is we won't engage a company, we won't work with a company unless we know that the C-suite is 100% committed, because it's that clear that it just doesn't happen if they're not. It's just an uphill battle.
just go for it.
Can I ask the question I asked you earlier? So not so long ago, there was this big wave about business intelligence, and a lot of enterprises have invested a team and resources in building a business intelligence team to solve some of the problems that we talked about earlier. And so my question is, when do you think, what are the gauging criteria for a company to consider moving into AI kind of platform, and how can we use the investment we're putting in BI into the AI initiative?
I'm not sure what you mean by BI. I mean, to me, I would
Business
say that
intelligence, like Cognos, business objects,
Okay,
Tableau,
so
Hyperion.
So you mean the
these
tools themselves,
Right?
Well, I mean, those tools can still be used to do like the data mining and do the data analysis, right? I mean, they don't go wasted. But I mean, you can pull in AI models to replace the older ones, as you can. But they can coexist. They often coexist.
And there are architectures to add on to those tool sets.
Let's get that out there.
Yes,
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that there are ways that you can augment the existing BI architecture with AI algorithms or other tools that, plug and play. Like a lot of these companies are actually considering the fact that organizations have already invested in BI tools. So how do they just take it to the next level, right? To give them the AI piece of that.
And I think it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? And I think that's one of the other points of doing this this holistic view of it. That these are individual projects that you can stage however it makes sense in each group.
I guess the fundamental question is what's the difference between BI and AI in the business environment?
It's okay. Don't go. Don't go.
So there's the spectrum, right? There's the descriptive, the diagnostic, the predictive, and then the prognostic, right? So it's all just about where you want to be on the spectrum. And I think AI gets you closer to where you're being more predictive against the data as opposed to just looking at what is there. Mm-hmm.
I hate that poll. It's so weird.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, do you have any sense of whether there are any standard timelines for putting this kind of process into effect?
That's it. Sorry, I can't see you while I answer. It's a good question, and we almost put some approximate time frames on here. But the bottom line is, it depends on how big the organization it is, and it depends on how long they are. But in general, to do for like a mid-market to Fortune 1000 kind of company, it takes about a month or two to do a thorough opportunity assessment, and you do that by stepping through the functional groups one by one, like I said, and get down to each business process and really dig into the ones where there's the biggest potential for return for savings, and then to go from once you have the list, so it would be like you guys' org charts. Once you have that all filled out, where you're really confident you have all the possibilities, to go from there to the roadmap is probably the most difficult part, because we advocate you actually go do that little quick and dirty, the quick and dirty model, and that takes gathering the data, that takes cleaning the data. So depending on how big again and how many projects, that's probably a 4 to 6 kind of a month kind of a proposition. And then once you have, to get to the ordered roadmap, and then from there, figuring out the supporting plans, you could actually like start doing the data system architecture before you're completely done, ordering them. So there's some overlap, but it's a couple more months. So I think anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get started. But remember, you can start on a lot of the automation ones. You don't have to wait. Sorry, I hate trying to answer. You can't hear me, but you don't have to wait to start doing the AI ones, because those aren't dependent on the culture, and you don't need to share data. You can get started on those right away.
Anyone else?
There's a couple up here.
Forgot to look at you speak.
Actually, my question is for you. For how do, I guess, like the industry buzzwords for the new data science job titles affect the efficiency of your skills matching service?
I would say that's the most abundant factor that affects data science staffing in general, is the idea that fundamental aspects around a position encompass a skill set, which is simply not the case. Data science needs to be looked at over a gradient system and not a bucketed system. You're not a specific type of engineer. There's lots of skill sets that can overlap in various areas. So
I'm sorry.
One of the aspects of our tool that really harps on this notion is that we're not going to bucket you into one position. Your skills will be displayed over a variance, over a gradient system. So we'll be able to talk about how strong you are in a particular machine learning application in a reference to that business domain application or whatever else needs to be involved. So whatever aspects it's really malleable in terms of a tool to use.
But that's actually a really good question, and there's a subtlety that just before yesterday when we were finishing up these slides, we used to have words in these 4 boxes that could have been interpreted as roles, and we changed it on purpose because we don't advocate that we add another layer of job titles and roles. It just doesn't work, and there's just too much nuance and too much granularity. So, it used to say data strategist in the upper left box, and in the system architecture we used to have data architect, but we purposely pulled them because we don't want to give that impression. If you guys look at you can see the profiles in your handouts. They're pretty detailed, but that's what you have to do right now. You have to get down to really understand, and all of that is based on a project portfolio. Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to hire somebody, I'm going to look at what they did and find somebody that, has done something similar. That's the other thing, like deep learning models are completely different from recommenders that are completely different from others, really, like we come out of the school, we came out of the data science program having been exposed to them all, but number one, by the time you graduate, it's changed so much that, you're already behind, and they continue to change, and you just get to where you're more and more specialized. And there really are, different animals. They're different. If you're trying to recommend products to somebody versus, do some sort of scientific analysis and, in vision or something, they're different. I guess effectively what's happening is it's not just that there's 4 roles within data science. There's a whole bunch of different disciplines that are emerging within the machine learning itself, Like there's a lot of discussion about whether machine learning or AI or whatever is going to end up being kind of its whole own discipline, kind of like, electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or whatever. And indeed, that's happening. It remains to be seen how it's going to settle out. But yeah, one data science, even machine learning engineer is not equal to another machine learning engineer.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yes, I would like to know your comment about the use and the ethic in the use of artificial intelligence, and what is the line, like in the case of Analytica that we have recently.
Are you talking about data governance?
No. The ethics in using the ethics in using the artificial. And what is the line where you don't want to cross? Such as profiling people, for example.
I'm not sure what he's at.
Profiling.
So I think the question is about ethics and people profiling. Where is the line? In your opinion, where is the line of ethics in profiling people with data? Is that the question? Okay.
Well, there are no standards, unfortunately, and there have been attempts to make standards like of what you can and can't do and anonymizing. But it turns out that even if you have a completely anonymized data set, generally there are other data sets available that you can triangulate it and you can fill it back in. So there's a lot of controversy. There's just no two ways about it. You think about if everybody shared their health data, and every oncologist had a database full of thousands and thousands of cases, that would save lives. If you had a kid or whatever that had cancer, you would have people to have shared that data, right? But then obviously there's the fear of it being misused and for insurance or whatever, and there's always going to be that contention. Yeah, and I flip-flop, right? There's so much good that can happen, and then there's also so much bad, and I think it's going to be kind of a case by case. There's some advocates for like creating some sort of a almost like a MSDS. I don't know if anybody in material sciences where there's like sheets that kind of dictate like how different chemical processes can be used. There's some talk about trying to do something like that where you have to say what you're using the data for and how you're using it and that kind of stuff. But I don't know how far it's going to get. But there's just no good answer.
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned there are like various clouds like Google and AWS and Microsoft, IBM. They all have their AI tool platforms and models. But then at the same time you're saying, machine learning or AI projects, they're all, each single one is so different. So do you think enterprises can really leverage all these different clouds, toolkits and models, or that's not enough? They have to have their own in-house?
Yeah, I think the cloud platform itself is really just the computing platform where it's actually clusters of computers versus where you're only working with one. It's just a generic Linux environment. Well, their models are the ones that are common, like the vision models and the language models. Those are the ones that are universal, right? And anybody has access to those. But in general, there are some applications where people can share. Like there are some like lead generation engines that from company to company, there's not so much different that they can kind of be effective. But recommenders don't have to be like super accurate, but the fact is that machine learning models are so exact, in general, they have to be built on your data to get the kind of accuracy that you need. So I'm not sure if I understood your question exactly, but
I guess my question is, how much of it can you rely on those cloud platforms, and how much you have to build in-house? Like AI capabilities.
That is in-house, I guess is what I'm saying, is that the industry has moved away from having on-premise. So essentially these cloud platforms replace your old on-premise IT environment, but all it really is a computing platform and some storage, And you can leverage, that their distributions of the tools and stuff. But in general, it's rented, it's like rented on-premise space. But the beauty of it is that when you're training a model, you get compute on demand. You literally can log on and choose, however many CPUs. You can have 1,000 computers. You can have, and it's all flexible because it's shared. So you don't have to pay for it all the time. You can just use it during peak times. They even have where, if you want it cheap, you can like bid for the time, and you can say, okay, only run mine when it's, the low time and it's however many cents or whatever. It's really, really very flexible to share resources and really affordable. Really, really affordable.
So on that point of virtual, VPC environment for an organization, one of the biggest hurdles that a lot of companies face is the security, their unwillingness of executives to put certain, what they say, proprietary information on, even if it's a private cloud, without either masking it or doing some sort of. So I think that's a big hurdle.
It is, and that's been the case since cloud. That whole, and they're offering where they're essentially quartering them off so that there's some extra, and it's all that trade-off of the cost of you maintaining yourself, and especially with data science, the flexibility of being able to use 3,000 computers when you need it, and then say, okay, I'm done, and not have to pay for them.
Yeah. So where are organizations? In general on that spectrum. So I know as an organization, a few years ago, we were unwilling, like 10 years ago, unwilling to put even email and any of our stuff. But now we put all of that stuff in the cloud, but still some of our real proprietary stuff, and some data science is one of them, is something that we're not willing to put just yet.
Some data, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, all the data has to be co-located together.
Exactly.
And it's a totally different file system, right?
Exactly.
It's not like,
Right, so then what do? You put some data there, but the rest is here, and then it's hard. So
you can't do a model in this.
How do organizations handle
They're
that?
making a choice between building an on-premise, like some of the banks and stuff. They build out an on-premise like duplicate of AWS, or they could run some of their operational stuff on the cloud and not. But
that's what we're seeing.
It's the age-old battle that has been ever since. Yeah.
There's a question over here, and then we'll come.
There's a hybrid model where you can have part. Oh, sorry.
So Beth, you alluded to earlier that you don't engage with the customer unless you're sure they're going to do something about it, right? So how are you segmenting your customers based on their willingness to act? And then the second part of that question is, once you choose such customers, how are you increasing that sense of urgency for them to actually expedite these things? Because while we are seeing the promise of the industry and the returns from competition standpoint, people are still sort of holding back in terms of getting things done.
Right. So we don't, I wouldn't say we segment our customers, it's just part of our own discovery process of, how promising we think it is, or what the chances are that, that we'd be successful. What was your first question? I can't remember the first part of it.
Yes, so how are you identifying? What's your qualification process of such customers?
we don't really have a hard and fast like that, and actually we've ended up doing kind of smaller engagements and not always, big holistic ones, and we'll do that for sure, right? And we didn't intend to do training. There's just this huge draw to do this kind of stuff. So our business model is kind of morphing. And the staffing thing too. I mean, we brought up the staffing capability when we thought that there was this scarcity, and we thought we were going to have to do that to help our customers staff. I mean, ultimately our goal is to have them grow it as a core competency. And we found, what Nick just talked about, but we actually also found that there's a really strong need in the data science community that the first time we made an outreach, it was like we got this outpouring of data scientists that feel lost, and they're really looking for, a lot of them are at companies that don't have the infrastructure in place, and they're not able to have any impact, and they're really frustrated, And so we've actually ended up sort of taking them not under our wing, but we didn't ever intend to place outside of for our clients, and we kind of do now, because when we find we don't want it wasted. So now when we find good candidates like that, we actually go ahead and help them find a job where they can feel where they're making an impact and feeling like they're happy.
I'd like to speak to that too, just a minute, because we presented a best case, right, where the C-suite is totally aligned, and that. Probably no C-suite in this entire room that is involved is totally aligned, right? And that's a real issue. And so that's affected how we go about doing things. So when we talk about that, we're talking about really undergoing a full implementation, right? And that takes a level of commitment that is hard to find. So what that has done to our own business is identify the need to go through very similar process that we went through today. If we can prove what the opportunities are, which is very difficult, right? It's very difficult because there's a lot of skepticism about what is possible. So from our standpoint, one of the most important things that comes about with this is that we need to recognize that this is a human endeavor. It's a very human endeavor. And it requires, what do humans like better than anything? A good story. So we need to build that story. We need to be able to, in some cases, do something like a more formalized version of this opportunity assessment that we rifled through today, so that senior level executives can see the promise and maybe be willing to make a leap that they would not be willing to make if they couldn't see that at the highest level and then at the ROI level. So it's a process of building that kind of experience. The world is doing it on its own in some cases, right? We're just getting more and more comfortable with examples of this kind of success. And that means that other people, there'll always be the stalwarts who are like, nah, that's just not going to happen. Like, who would ever put their credit card on the internet, right? All those kinds of things are going to exist, right? But those break down over time. So if we're in this room, it's because we're really on the front end of something. And our biggest challenge is to try to communicate this to our CEOs, to our executive teams. And there are ways to do that, and it really revolves around a very human experience, getting down to what is absolutely essential to us which is fear and promise and all these kinds of things.
All right, so we got a question down front here. Okay.
I just wanted to understand the engagement model between a centralized AI team and different business units, because we started doing AI and machine learning in one business unit, and our CEO said, okay, you guys form an enterprise team and support all other business units. But business units don't understand when they have a problem that machine learning or this AI solution can actually solve it. So how does the engagement model work? Should we go or should they come?
When you're talking when it's within the internal organization, right? Within your organization.
Correct.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't work that way. I think that's a part of it, is that it has to be embedded in the business units for them to even understand it. And I was talking to somebody over here too that one of the biggest missing capabilities isn't people that can build models; it's strategists that know how to identify business problems that can be solved with machine learning. And then the other really big missing step is a lot of times they get treated like experiments, and they don't get wrapped in like whole solutions, and they don't think about how it's going to get integrated into the business process and stuff. But that is a huge missing piece. When we staff, or we have a project staffing template that we give our clients to use. And there's a row that's business contribution, there's a row that's the machine learning contribution, and a row that's the data and platform contribution. And they're all different. But that might be a way for you to start is when you staff a team, make sure you have somebody that can fill each of those boxes in the room, because that's the only way that you can be successful, is to have all that together.
So, for example, a domain expert from finance would be part of our team as a business expert.
Well, for models in their area, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone else? Any questions? All right. So no, going once. So we're gonna. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Cool.
In general, in most enterprises, all of the BI or data science is held by the groups that are very deeply invested in RDBMS technology, right? So, like relational databases and anything that runs on SQL or anything that runs on Oracle is what they're familiar with.
Right.
Taking data out of those databases is considered as a sin, especially in the East Coast, right? I mean, because where DBA is a god, right? I would like to understand if you guys have experience dealing with such organizations and explain us how.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really a fear thing for sure, right? And actually, of any part of data science, that platform level, the database level, and there's tons of tools for porting stuff, and for keeping it all coherent with the other systems. That part's actually really teachable. And I think that if that was my company, I would teach them. I would just, educate them, because the NoSQL stuff, it's not all that different, right? I mean, it's different than what they're used to, but it's learnable, And it's just, I mean, it's a growth, and they coexist. Structured stuff and unstructured coexists in the data science environment, right?
If you guys have had a experience dealing with such organizations or not, I mean.
Not that I can think of, not directly.
Anyone else?
Ute?
Yes? No? No takers?